All right, guys, so the election is over, and so far we're showing that Joe Biden has won. But a lot of people are wondering, was the election fair and was it without fraud? We're going to take a look at both sides of the equation here. Next. CJ Highway back with another video. And the first thing we need to talk about is, how is someone elected to be president of the United States to begin with? Well, it's through a process called the Electoral College. And this was something established by the founding fathers in the Constitution. And it was meant to be a compromise between the election of the president by a vote from Congress, as well as the election of the president by a vote from the citizens. It consists of something called electors. These electors represent what are called electoral colleges. Each state has a certain number of electoral colleges that can be cast towards a candidate of a political party to become president. The total amount of electoral colleges would be 538. And out of these, to become president in the United States, you just have to receive 270 of those electoral votes. So on this page here, as you can see, it has an outline showing you how many electoral colleges each state has. So for example, you can see in Texas, they have 38, for Florida, 29, Illinois, 20, New York, 29, vice versa, so on and so forth, rather. So the way it works is this. Let's take the state of Florida, and let's say that 51% of the people there decide to vote for the Republican candidate. Well, because 51% of all the people voted Republican, the Republican candidate will receive those 29 electoral college votes. The same also works in reverse if 51% of the people voted Democratic. And so the only two exceptions to this would be the two states of Maine and Nebraska. They actually have some parameters that determine how they may cast their electoral college votes. It's just a little more complex, but all the other 48 states do it based on the process I'm actually explaining here. Now, there are some people that believe that this isn't fair, and they believe that essentially the people who don't go or don't vote according to the turnout of the election, that their votes essentially didn't count. So, for example, they would say that in the one with Florida here, when I mentioned before, that the 49% who voted Democratic, essentially their votes didn't count. But really, let's examine it from another angle. Let's say we were doing elections for the president here in the United States based on the popular vote. And 51% of the people voted Republican and 49% voted Democratic. Well, do those people who vote Democratic, even though they only make 49%, does their vote not count? Well, many people would say, yes, their vote does count. If they had not have voted, we would not have known which candidate would have won. Proponents of that view take the stance and say that the same thing is being done essentially, but just at the state level. So, for example, in Florida, 51% of the people vote Republican, then that's the majority. And so that's the reason why they give all of the electoral college votes for that state to that candidate. In this case, an example, the Republican candidate. Remember, in order to become president, the candidate just has to receive 270 electoral college votes. That's the reason why you can have a situation where someone can actually receive the most votes overall, but still not win, because it's going to depend on how many electoral college votes they receive. I'll give you an example. Let's say that in New Mexico here, it has 5 electoral college votes, for example. But let's say more people vote for the Democratic candidate in New Mexico than in Texas. Now, let's say total together, New Mexico and Texas, let's say just for example, if the election was only with those two states to decide who was president, and the Democratic candidate received most of the votes for New Mexico, so they would get how many electoral college votes? They would receive 5. But then in Texas, most of the citizens voted Republican. All right. But you still had enough people that voted Democratic so that if you add the actual populations of New Mexico and Texas together, the candidate for Democrat, they actually received more votes. But the Republican candidate would win the election. Why? Because Texas has 38 electoral college votes. So essentially, if it was just an election between New Mexico and Texas, and you put those two populations together, and most of the people voted Democratic, but only in New Mexico was the majority of that state's population voting Democratic, then the Democratic candidate would only receive 5 electoral college votes. Whereas the Republican candidate in Texas, if the majority of the people there voted Republican, then they would have 38 electoral college votes. So that's a small example, and I hope it makes sense. I hope you guys were able to follow me. But that's how it would work with the one candidate receiving the most votes overall, even though they lost the election because they didn't have the most electoral college votes. There's been 5 times in history that it's occurred where a candidate had the most votes overall, the popular vote as we would say, but still lost the election. The most recent one was actually in 2016. Hillary Clinton, the Democratic candidate for president in the United States, had close to 2 million more votes, according to the popular vote, than what Donald Trump had. But Donald Trump had the electoral college votes, and that's the reason why he won the election. The U.S. is not the only country that exercises a electoral college system. You have other countries like Burundi, Estonia, India, Kazakhstan, Madagascar, Myanmar, Pakistan, and a few others that also have an electoral college system. But even so, there are many people, and there's been multiple times throughout history where there's been a vote to try and abolish it, but every time it never passed. For example, take a look at this clip of Elizabeth Warren.
Get rid of the Electoral College and everybody.
So as you can see, she's obviously a proponent of one of those who wish to abolish the Electoral College system. But the other thing that comes into play is fraud. And I'll tell you what, according to USA Today, election fraud can be committed by voters, election officials, campaign officials, or others. And this is according to the FBI. So we have to ask ourselves a question. If it's acknowledged by the government that fraud can occur with an election, isn't it reasonable also to assume that it probably does, and we just don't hear much about it until now? For example,
if you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal the election from us. And there are many instances which will be reported very shortly. There's tremendous litigation going on. And this is a case where they're trying to steal an election. They're trying to rig an election.
Democracy depends upon fair elections. President Trump's team is going to have a chance to make a case regarding voting irregularities. They deserve a chance to make that case. I'm going to stand with President Trump. If a Democrat were doing this, it'd be cheered on. We're not going to let the media intimidate us into exploring whether or not these contests were fairly had.
The president suggests that illegal votes are being counted. Have you seen any evidence of fraud occurring in your state?
The president's speech last night was very disturbing to me because he made very, very serious allegations without any evidence to support it.
Out walked the president's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani.
Wow, what a beautiful day. Thank you.
With him, witnesses, he said, to mass electoral fraud.
That they were uniformly deprived of their right to inspect any single part of the mail-in ballots.
It's 3 days since he first alleged fraud. Since then, he says he's found 50 witnesses, but only a handful were available to speak.
So we have officials alleging that voter fraud did in fact occur in this election. And according to the FBI, that's an election crime, and it's a federal crime as well if the ballot includes one or more federal candidates, an election or polling place official abuses their power, the conduct involves false voter registration, the crime intentionally targets minority protected classes, or the activity violates federal campaign finance laws. And do we think for a second that election crimes didn't occur before? This is regardless of what candidate you're for, whether you're a Democrat or Republican or Libertarian or conservative, whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is, do we imagine that it's never happened before? Because we can go back to examples of election crimes way back in the 1800s. For example, in or around 1870, African Americans were given the right to vote. But there were grandfather clauses such as literacy tests, poll taxes, and even outright violence, which actually suppressed their ability to vote. These are election crimes. This is one of the reasons why the FBI has it on their website that if it intentionally targets minority protected classes, it's because we have a history in the United States of minorities being denied their actual right to vote, which is still an election crime. And right now we've got all this attention and focus on voter fraud and election crimes. For example, at Fox News, it's alleged that a USPS worker had undelivered mail in their trunk, including ballots. And there are claims that are going around that said that ballots were received from people who are dead. CNN actually has an article that's actually debunking this because they're saying that it's actually misinformation being put out by the masses. Whether you believe that it's legit or not, again, forget about what party you support. We're just asking a question. And do you in fact believe that election crimes haven't happened before and that they're going to still probably happen in the future? That's something we have to kind of think about because, again, some people don't even believe that the way that we cast a vote for the presidential elections in the U.S. is fair. Some of them believe that those of us who actually vote are like this. Either way, guys, I'm not here to judge on how you vote or who you vote for or anything. That's for each one of us individually to decide. So whether you voted for Joe Biden or Donald Trump, it was your right to vote. And it was your right to choose the candidate that you felt would best be the person to take our country forward. So with that, this is all I have for you guys today. I want to thank you for watching the video as always. CJ Highway out.